man stands in front of the camera. The studio lights wash his face pale. His eyes are bloodshot, hollow from sleepless nights. His hands tremble, clasped tightly together, as if holding on to his last hope. He takes a deep breath. Then, before millions of viewers across the nation, he begs America to help him find his wife and child. Not as a witness, not as a public figure, but as a husband, as a father, terrified that he is about to lose everything. But only days later, sympathy begins to crack. Small details no longer align. His answers start to change. And then the police realize something terrifying. The person they are looking for never left the frame. It is the same man who stood in front of the camera. The man who cried. The man who begged the entire nation for help. It was him. There are crimes that do not begin with violence. No screams, no blood. They begin with silence. This is not a story about insanity, not a monster, not an outcast, but someone very ordinary. Someone like you, someone like me. But from the outside, everything seemed fine. No warnings, no cracks, no sign that tragedy was quietly approaching. It was a quiet neighborhood. Too quiet, houses so identical they blurred together. Lawns trimmed to perfection, nothing out of place. And because of that, everything looked perfectly unsettling. They were a typical American middle-class family. A father with a steady job, a mother who took care of the home, and two children growing up in a house that had everything. Every morning began like any other. Children laughing, adults getting ready for the day ahead. No arguments, no signs of trouble. Inside the house, everything was in its place, too perfectly in place. Toys neatly lined up, a living room bright, almost sterile, sunlight flooding through the windows as if there were nothing to hide. On social media, they were a happy family, photos capturing moments of togetherness, videos filled with laughter that never seemed to stop. From the outside, people would think, they're so lucky, and maybe they wanted to believe that too. No one asked questions, no one suspected a thing, because everything looked exactly like millions of other families. But the most frightening part was that no one suspected anything at all. Smiles appeared every day, on time, in the right moments. Familiar hugs, not rushed, yet no longer warm. Words delivered smoothly, sounding right, safe, but somewhere along the way, the feeling had already left. There were no major conflicts, no sudden outbursts of anger, no shouting, no doors slammed shut. Just a very small distance, so small no one noticed when it first appeared. A silence that lingered a few seconds longer. A glance that no longer met another. So small, it was almost invisible. There were no major conflicts, no sudden outbursts of anger, no shouting, no doors slammed shut. Just a very small distance, so small no one noticed when it first appeared. A silence that lingered a few seconds longer. A glance that no longer met another. So small, it was almost invisible. Not every tragedy begins with a shock. No loud noise, no explosive moment. Sometimes it begins with very small changes, so small that at first no one notices. Life continues as usual. Old routines repeat themselves. Days pass without any obvious disruption. But the feeling is different. Something is out of rhythm, a vague unease that can't quite be named. The man in the family begins to grow quieter. Not the silence of exhaustion, not the kind that follows a long day, but a very gentle withdrawal, slow, almost polite. He is still there, still seated, still listening, but his eyes drift elsewhere. His answers grow shorter. The pauses last longer than they should. A small step back, so small no one names it. He is still there, still sitting at the table with his family, still speaking in measured sentences. Just enough, never too much. Everything still looks fine, but his eyes often drift elsewhere, resting on empty space or a glowing phone screen, rarely on the faces across from him. Conversations grow shorter, ending sooner than expected. Hugs become rushed, a brief touch, then release, like a task to be checked off. He is still there. He's just no longer with them the way he used to be. And the distance between them begins to grow. Little by little, No major arguments, no shouting in the night, no one storms out, no doors are slammed, just a quiet coldness appearing more often. Questions no longer asked, answers no longer waited for. The distance doesn't arrive all at once. It stays, silent, and slowly it becomes familiar. There are evenings when he sits there, in the familiar chair, inside the familiar room, but his mind seems to be somewhere else. His eyes linger on a screen, then drift away, leaving no trace behind. There are messages read very quickly, too quickly for anyone else to notice. The screen goes dark. His face returns to calm, as if nothing ever happened. There are calls answered in another room. A door closes softly. His voice drops lower. Short replies. No one asks. No one follows. And the house in that moment feels a little larger. If you look at each detail on its own, nothing seems serious enough to be called dangerous. But when all of them are put together, they begin to form a different picture. A man no longer connected to the life he has. A man who begins to think about a way out. He talks about being tired, about pressure, about wanting to change. Words that sound reasonable, but they are missing the most important thing: responsibility. The truth is, he doesn't want to fix anything. He wants to disappear from the role he has. And while everyone around him still believes this is just a difficult phase, inside his mind, a different decision is slowly taking shape. The signs were already there, clearer with each passing day, but no one stopped long enough to look directly at him, because no one wants to believe that something terrible can come from someone who appears completely normal. And within that silence, everything moves closer to the point of no return. That morning, everything began like an ordinary day. Morning light slipped through the windows. The street remained still. Nothing hinted that something was wrong. There were no screams, no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no forced doors. The house was still there, intact, silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But the people inside were gone, and that absence weighed heavier than any sound ever could. The woman and the two children disappeared from the house without leaving any clear trace. The phone was still there. The handbag was still there. No note, no sign of preparation to leave. The silence inside the house did not feel like a sudden trip. It felt like a void left behind. When the police are called, the man appears looking worried. He says he doesn't understand what happened, that his wife and children suddenly disappeared. He cooperates, answers questions. Everything sounds very reasonable. But there is one thing that makes people uneasy. It's the way he speaks, not the words themselves, but the emotion that comes with them. He talks about worry, yet his voice remains flat. He talks about fear, yet his eyes don't linger long enough. In front of the television cameras, he begs people to help find his family. He says that he misses them, that he wants them to return safely. But the more he speaks, the harder that emotion becomes to grasp. There are moments when he pauses mid-sentence, as if he's thinking about what he's supposed to feel next. To outsiders, it may appear to be an unusual reaction to shock, but to those who understand the truth, it is a sign. Because when someone has truly suffered a loss, fear and pain usually don't need to be expressed. They appear on their own. And here everything seems to be arranged. While the entire neighborhood begins to worry, while the police start asking questions, the man remains standing there, as if waiting for something to happen. And from this very moment, the story is no longer a simple missing persons case, because sometimes the one who stays behind is the one who knows best what really happened. A lie can survive for a few minutes, but it cannot last long under simple questions. When the police begin to review what the man has said, they are not looking for emotion. They are looking for consistency. And that is when the small details begin to no longer line up. The timeline he provides doesn't match what was recorded. The things he says he did leave no corresponding trace. At first, the differences are very small, just a few minutes, a few missing details. But each time the story's told again, it changes in a very subtle way. Not big enough to be called an outright lie, but clear enough to make someone stop and notice. There are questions he answers too quickly, and there are other questions that require more time to think. Not because he doesn't remember, but because he is choosing a different version of the truth. What he says begins to raise more questions than answers. And while he tries to keep his story standing, time is doing the opposite. With each passing hour, the possibility that the family left on their own becomes less plausible. There are no signs of preparation, no luggage, no clear reason to disappear completely. As for the man, he is still there, still answering, still cooperating, but his calm begins to feel noticeable. While everyone around him grows increasingly worried, he never loses control. No panic, no desperation, just a strange sense of patience. And sometimes that very calm is what makes people question the most, because when someone truly doesn't know what has happened, they usually don't know how to remain calm at all. His story doesn't collapse in a single moment. It collapses piece by piece. But there is one thing he cannot control: time. Because the longer it goes on, the truth moves closer to the surface, and it is only a matter of time before he has nowhere left to hide. The truth does not always appear in chaos. Sometimes it appears in a very quiet room. No audience, no cameras, just a table, a few chairs, and one person who is slowly running out of things to say. He begins to remain silent for longer periods. The pauses stretch longer than usual, as if he is realizing that there is no way out left. No one forces him, no one raises their voice, just questions asked at the right moment. And then, the truth begins to surface, not through emotion, but through short statements, fragmented, almost lifeless. He doesn't say much about what happened. He talks about what he wants: a different life, a different beginning, a path without any more restraints. And it is right there that the true nature of the story becomes clear. This was not an impulsive act. This was a choice formed from selfishness and sustained by avoidance. He does not speak with remorse, nor does he speak with hatred. His voice is flat, as if he is recounting a decision that was accepted long ago. And that is what makes it the most frightening part. Not anger, not a loss of control, but a calmness in abandoning his responsibility. When the admission ends, the room falls back into silence. No one says anything more, because by then, every important question has already been answered. And that man finally has nothing left to hide. When all words have ended, the story no longer belongs to what happened. It belongs to the consequences. That man has no new beginning, no chance to start over, only cold walls and time stretching endlessly. The family that once appeared in happy photographs now exists only in the memories of those left behind. Nothing can make up for what has been lost. But this story does not end simply to speak of a crime. It exists to remind us of something else. That not all danger appears in chaos. Sometimes it hides within normalcy, in familiar smiles, in words that sound right, and in the silence we have grown accustomed to ignoring. This tragedy was not created in a single
who wants to
moment.
stir the pot?
It was formed day by day, by avoidance, by treating responsibility as a burden. And when someone begins to see the people beside them as obstacles, the moral boundary begins to disappear. Not everyone who lives a double life becomes a criminal, but every crime begins when we stop seeing others as human beings. If there is a lesson from this story, it is this: pay attention to the smallest changes, to prolonged silence, to distances that go unnamed, because monsters do not
as a
always
witness,
scream.
not as
Sometimes
a
they
public
smile
figure,
and live among us every
but
day.
as a husband, as
This
a
story
father.
is not told to spread fear. It is told to
Please, I
remind
am
us that
begging you.
normalcy is not always safe.
Help me